Hello, thank you everyone for joining. We should be starting in a couple of minutes. Just have some patience and we should be starting like in 3 minutes. Thank you everyone for joining. Just give us a couple more minutes and we'll be starting shortly. Hello everyone, thank you for joining. I'm just going to give a couple more minutes. We should be starting soon. Thanks again. Hello, I'm just going to give it another minute. Okay, I think I will start. Hello, and thank you for joining today's talk with the Insider Trader. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Andriano, and I cover fraud risk for the EMEA region. Before we start, I want to let you know that this event is jointly sponsored by Mark, GLBA, and Risk. And I want to thank them as well as Corporate Communications for their support with putting this event together. Please note that there is a short 3-question survey when the talk ends. Please take the 2 minutes to complete it. And as a reminder, Slido is open. If you like to submit any questions, the password is SGCIB. So with me today is Joseph Gramasek, who is a former securities lawyer who decided to trade on insider information and was eventually caught. I heard Joseph speak back in 2019 and found his story to be very captivating. I felt his message should be heard and would help spread fraud awareness. You know that in our business, many of us have access to confidential and proprietary information, whether it's at work or through an inner circle of family, friends, and business colleagues. We hear and see information that we could capitalize on. And it's not just stocks, there's also a big market for personal data. and which is why there are specific rules on insider trading, and regulators expect organizations to have certain controls in place to protect this information. So why did I find this story good? Maybe it's because when I look at Joseph, I just see an ordinary person. He looks like a coworker or a friend. And what I ask is, please listen to him, listen to what got him started, how he did what he did, and how he rationalized his behavior. I hope you get something out of this talk. And with that, we'll start a short trailer.
My name is Joseph Kremosik. I'm a former lawyer in Ontario. I am the first and perhaps still only Canadian to receive a federal sentence of imprisonment for insider trading. It was an activity that I engaged in over 100 separate deals covering 15 years that eventually resulted in my imprisonment and the death of my co-accused.
Around the world, there's over 100 countries that prohibit insider trading, where if you're someone with confidential information, you are an executive or an officer, an employee, and you trade on your knowledge, that's something that we condemn.
Neither of us remembers whose idea was like, we should do this too, but obviously one of us said, let's do this too. My best friend was here because of me and mistakes I made.
Is there a problem on Bay Street? For sure. In some ways, greater risks than in Wall Street or London.
At a certain point in time, we were making so much money trading, so I left the best firm in Canada and then moving down to being a guy trading stock with insider information full time.
If my job is to find reasons why the rules don't apply to you, well, then I can find reasons why they don't apply to me.
Characteristics of psychopathy, such as manipulation, charming, are really valued in business.
My sense is that in the criminal context, we treat crimes that relate to physical harm very seriously and crimes that relate to economic harm a little bit less seriously.
Joseph has certainly paid for his crime. He's lost his best friend, had the most harshest sentence ever for any Canadian in relation to this crime.
He was my best friend, and then he just disappears after, a terrible situation. And I've never filled that void with anyone else or anything else. I could say I think about it every single day. Thank you for that introduction, John. I guess I'll just start. That is a trailer to a educational documentary called Collared that I helped put together after release from prison, with the goal really of preventing white-collar crime or even ethical breaches by focusing on the unforeseeable consequences for those that perpetrate these crimes. And in my case, I think it probably was foreseeable, but I lost everything. Obviously, I lost my money, lost many friends, reputation. I lost contact with family for a large period of time. And my co-accused, who was a partner at a US law firm in Toronto at the end, his son lost a father, his wife lost a husband, and he lost his life when he jumped to his death the day before we were both supposed to fly to New York to plead guilty. I was set to have a sentence of 3 years, 3 months, and he was going to get a sentence of 3 years, 6 months plus 5 more years for possibility of 5 more years for breach of fiduciary duty. And if I was being honest, my best friend, who I loved like a brother, he died hating me and blaming me for the situation at the end, because at the end, I was resentful about still engaging in the activity, and I didn't take the same precautions I did initially, which I'll discuss later on. And it eventually resulted in us being identified, then our worlds blowing up, and him handling it differently than I did, and taking his life again before seeing me for the first time. Actually, we were going to fly to New York to plead guilty. It was actually about a 1-year period when I last saw him. And I think seeing me again also contributed, the possibility of seeing me again also contributed to his decision. So that's really one of the, an unforeseeable consequence. If you told me when I started the activity, if you said, you'll have these positives, but at the end, you're going to lose everything and your best friend will take his life rather than see you again. I certainly would never have done it for no amount of money. It's just the pain for his family and his son and my family impacted. It would not be worth it. So that's why we created the documentary, so we could focus on consequences like that, so people actually appreciate, let's say, compliance lessons or ethical lessons by looking at maybe not seeing themselves that. I don't think anyone here can envision doing what I did. I hope not, but they can see themselves maybe if they make a mistake, that the possibility of consequences that they can't foresee or much bigger than they think could happen happening to them. So that's the point of my talk. So just to go through the list, why I'm speaking to you today, it's not because it's any condition of my probation or parole. My sentence is over. Anyone who understands prison, the expression is I'm on road now. My sentence is completely over. I could do whatever I want. I just choose to do these type of talks. I speak for free to MBA schools, law schools around the world, actually, and to any firms like yours that invite me in to tell my story and share my lessons. It's not for personal enrichment, as I donate my fees to a charity. I recently was involved in starting a charity in Toronto. I'm the founding program director for a charity called Restorative Justice Housing Ontario. It's started by people who've been through the criminal justice system and saw a need. So what we do is we rent houses in the private marketplace, just a regular home, and we sublet rooms within it to long-term ex-offenders who are committed to reform, but for many reasons can't find a safe place to live on their own. And the very first person I put into a room, it was just a modest room in a modest house in a lower income part of Toronto. And I put him in there. He was 7 years old. He'd done 40 something years in prison, not for murder. He had done a crime earlier when he was younger and then was involved in escape. And then someone got hurt in the escape and he was given a life sentence. So he'd done 40 something years. And we saw this room because we had found him in a very rundown rooming house in Toronto. He was being beaten up for his prescription medication every week. So he came into this room, again, a very modest room, not large, nothing special. He started crying and he said, I want to die here. That's like, he said, it was it's such a big change for him. He felt so safe and thought it was so much better where he came from. He said, I want to die here. And I knew right then and there, that moment, because I was moved to tears when he said that to me, that I was on the right path. Whatever the path I was on before, this is the path I've chosen now to try to help people from my experience. And I knew right there and there, I've helped one person and there's been many, many, many more since then. So I feel grateful for groups like yours to bringing me in and actually give me a chance to donate my fees to this charity. Next, it's not as a cautionary tale for professionals, though it should be. Again, I don't think anyone here would do what I did, but there'll be moments in your life where perhaps your ethics, morality are challenged because of professional pressures or personal pressures, financial pressures, or even pressures of isolation. And at that point in time, I'm actually quite graphic at times in my talks, if people let me, is that I want them to pause at that moment in time and think about possible consequences. And I think if you pause, for most people, your natural ethics and morality will manifest themselves and you will let that negative opportunity or negative path pass you by. And that's the goal of my talks and why I never refuse to answer a question. I lay it all out there for people because I don't want to think that if I just said a little bit more, I might have helped one person not go down a negative path that I did or my co-accused did. So later on, if you ask me any question, I will answer any question. There's no limitations on that. And if it's not to share anecdotes from prison about markets and trading, although I have three, each one is different shades of inappropriate. I will quickly tell one. I found myself in a medium prison called Fenbrook. And at that prison, the warden was inclined to encourage the inmates to get on the methadone drug replacement program. So if you were addicted to heroin or had drug addictions, they prescribe you methadone, which is equally addictive, but it can be adjusted by medical professionals to slowly wean you off your addiction. So at this prison, every morning before 7 o'clock, about 10% of all the inmates would line up to get their methadone. And the process was the methadone was mixed in applesauce. So the nurse would hand you the methadone cup, you would ingest it, and then you'd have to open your mouth to one guard on one side and then to another guard on the other side under your tongue to make sure you'd swallow it, and then you would be allowed to leave. So I was in my cell, and my cellmate, Steve, who was in for manslaughter, I woke up about 7 o'clock. He's standing there holding 4 chocolate bars. And then another individual walks into our cell. I didn't know who he was, but I knew he was on the methadone program. And Steve gives him these 4 chocolate bars. This guy comes in, he puts the chocolate bars in his pocket, and he proceeds to vomit into the hands of my cellmate, Steve. He methadone-laced applesauce vomit into his hands. And then Steve consumes it, warm, swallows it all up. And, there's a terrible image before breakfast in the morning. And I knew right then and there, I took 2 lessons from it. Number one, avoid any drug addictions of any kind the rest of your life, which I've done. And number 2, for the traders listening right now, if you can bring a buyer and seller together, there's a market for everything. So if you can sell methadone-laced vomit, you can pretty much sell anything. So why am I speaking to you today? It's to show the importance of professional ethics, the unforeseeable consequences for professionals like you of breach, and what can be done to better protect information by detailing how my co-accused and I improperly acquired it. We acquired enough information for 120 separate deals. That's not 120 separate trades, buy, sell, buy, sell. There were thousands and thousands of those. These are 120 separate individual deals spanning a 15-year period of time. And I actually don't know the number of them. We lost count. There's so many. When I pled guilty to in Canada and the United States, I think they selected only 32 of all the deals we'd inside trading on, because they said they could prove those cases without my cooperation, and to get below a $10 million US threshold, which because of the sentencing guidelines, it would allow me to have a sentence less than 5 years. Otherwise, according to the guidelines, if they'd done all the deals, I would have to do something close to 20 years. And we wanted to have a universal settlement covering Canada and the US. In Canada, I was the first person convicted under the new legislation, and I'm still the only person convicted. If you go to Wikipedia, you see and type in insider trading, you look at all the countries, you come to Canada, and you just go down the list and you go across in the name, and it's just me. I'm the only person noted in Wikipedia for Canada insider trading. And finally, it's to solve a mystery for me and to answer any questions for you. Whenever I present to obviously a collection of intelligent professionals, I ask them a question that's been troubling me for years, and oftentimes people give me their insights either directly during the presentation or they email me afterwards what they think the answer is, and I always am blessed by those emails. So perhaps I'll get some more of those this time. Next slide, please. The rules governing insider trading are complex and vary by jurisdiction. As you probably know, it's largely judge-made law in the US. The Insider Trading Prohibition Act is yet to be law in your country. And in Canada, it's statute-based. And in the EU, it's largely statute-based. But the essential elements are really the same in all these jurisdictions. It's the buying or selling of security, stocks, options, et cetera, using information that's material, expected to affect the price, and non-public, not publicly known, not stated through press releases and the like. It's one of those situations where I think you know it when you see it for the most part. Next slide, please. And when I get to the careless public comments, the person running the slides, if they could raise it up a little bit, I can't see the bottom of them, but so thank you. Okay, so we acquired information directly and indirectly, and close and more extended. So the first level of what we would obtain enough information to fuel all these deals was working directly on transactions. So my co-accused was a securities lawyer for an American firm in Toronto and a big New York firm at one time also. So that is, I would say to John, who's involved with compliance, that is the weakest link in the chain, the individual, because if someone controls the deal flow, it's really hard to stop them from doing something inappropriate. And, I've talked to other regulators and other compliance people. And for that reason, my talks are always focused on the individual and focusing on consequences for them. Because, you can set up a bunch of rules, but again, if someone wants to breach them, they will. But if you emphasize to them, the consequences are far greater than you can imagine. In my case, it's certainly far greater than we thought it would. When we started, a true story, we fell into it. So I was working at a law firm in downtown Toronto, just starting my career, and it was either the first or second day of orientation, and I'm milling about with the 20 new lawyers to be in the lobby waiting for our tour, and I see a summer student walking by to the person and coming to talk to the person standing right beside me. And this summer student for this firm, a very large firm in Toronto, he's wearing white leather driving shoes. So back then I was a fan of Formula One racing, so I recognized these were driving shoes. And I said to them, I said, why are you wearing these driving shoes here at the office? And he said, just matter-of-factly, well, I'm having a car delivered in the next half an hour downstairs of this Bay Street building, and with money that I just bought from money I made on a deal I've been working on. Now, the firm obviously didn't pay you by the deal. It paid you biweekly, salary, et cetera. So I took that to mean that he had made enough money insider trading, working on a deal he'd been working on as a summer student, and he used that to buy the car. So I phoned my co-accused best friend who was working at another firm, starting his career, and I told him the story, and neither of us remembers who said, hey, let's do it too, but clearly one of us did. And it's discussed in the documentary. No, neither of us, even though we're both testifying and giving information to the SEC, OSC in Ontario, the FBI, and the RCMP in Canada, neither of us is like saying it's the other guy's fault, because neither of us remembers. We're both being very truthful in that sense. And the first deal we did, we made $181. And within 2 years, I am at that point, we're making millions of dollars a deal. Within 2 years, I am living in New York. I'm trading full time. He's basically doing full time as part of his job and finding information out. And we're so far deep into it at that point. I'm addicted to the rush of not necessarily the money. It was not the money. It was the finding the information and then turning that into something actionable. And he was addicted to the psychological benefit of having something above people in his firms. Like, you know, they thought, you know, he was had an insecurity complex. He graduated from McCain Law School, but he became a very good lawyer. But, you know, people down at the Harvard or other large law schools in the US would look down on him. And he said, well, you're so smart. I have this, I had this on you. You don't know what I'm doing behind your back, sort of thing. And we both had our own addictions, and it got so big so fast that we couldn't stop in that sense. And we didn't until the end, until everything blew up. So the next level beyond the individual is spelunking through offices. Now, spelunking is a word meaning cave diving. So we realized, my co-accused was working in New York at that time at a big firm. I intentionally don't name the firms. I don't think there's a value to that, but if you follow the case, you would know what it is. So we discovered that you could never stay late enough in a firm in New York to be the last person working. You know, you can stay 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. There's always someone working. And it's really hard to be the first person if you coming in the morning, if you 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., there's always someone that. So we had tracked the flow in and out of this office of 700 or so lawyers. And we found that 3:30 in the morning was the best time when no one was there. So he would, my job was to wake him up, and he would get to the office for 3:30, and he would just go from office to office door in the M&A department, other parts of the firm. And and if it was unlocked, he would just walk in and see what's there. He would look on desks, look in garbage cans, and find information. At one point, he'd walked into an office, and all these M&A documents were laid out on the table, and a summary sheet of the deal, who's involved, the price of the deal, the timing of the deal, the press releases, whatever everything's due, was all laid out on one sheet of paper, and it was put perfectly in the middle of the desk, but facing the door. If you walked in, you could see that and read it. Even without walking in, you could read it from a little distance. And it was so obvious. He called me, he said, is this a setup? Like, are they setting us up to buy on this deal on this sheet? Because it's so much information. We never had so much information on one sheet of paper. And then we realized that it's probably not. It's probably just indifference to precautions, because if they're going to the trouble of setting us up with a sheet like this, they've already got us, because there's probably a camera looking at him going from office to office door. So we actually did end up buying that deal. We said, well, I think it's just a mistake on someone's part being sloppy. We bought the deal happened. Nothing ever happened to us. I probably made $500,000 or more dollars on that one, and nothing happened to us. So it was just one lawyer, M&A lawyer, who was just extremely sloppy about about security. The next level beyond that is nighttime staff's anonymous passwords. Now, I don't know what your firm's policy is on giving out passwords. I hope they're all specific to an individual and changed regularly. So at that time, this firm was an international law firm, had offices in Toronto, New York, Seattle, Minnesota, other places. And what they would do is, when staff would come in at night to do typing and other work, they would give them all an anonymous password. But for whatever reason, it was a password that it wasn't attributed to an individual or even an office. It was the same password for all the firms. So if my co-accused accessed an M&A document of a lawyer in Seattle, for example, it would say Gil Kornblum was his name. It would say Gil Kornblum looked at this document from Toronto. And of course, at a certain point in time, a lawyer in Seattle or New York or something would say, why is this guy in Toronto looking on my deal documents when he's not involved in it? But instead, now we used anonymous passwords. It would just say anonymous assistant access this document. And the lawyer might not pay attention to that. You might think, well, there's someone who just wants a precedent of a particular file, or this is a nighttime assistant of some lawyer somewhere. He couldn't really track it down who looked at it. And that was a great source of information, because it basically allowed us to look through the firm's entire offices around the world anonymously, without anyone catching on to what we were doing at nighttime. The level beyond that, which is conflict searches that were too detailed. So what would happen is, as again I mentioned, he's working at an American law firm in Toronto, and a lot of Canadian firms would want to hire his firm to represent the other side of a deal, let's say US-Canada deal. And so they would want to see if there's a conflict of his firm representing them. So they would call my co-accused, and they'd say, hey, can you work on this deal? And because we had ulterior motive of getting enough information to inside trade, getting enough information from other professionals inside trade on for ourselves, he would start asking questions. So if during this questioning, he had enough information, let's say it was an M&A deal, a takeover deal, if he had enough information from this phone call to say he knew, let's say, who was being bought and the price and maybe the timing, he would tell the person, say, no, I'm sorry, we can't represent you. We have a conflict. That person would go away and hire another firm. But we now had the source of the information of the takeover deal, and we would trade on it. So if anything ever happened, there was no connection to his firm and this deal because someone just called for conflict and then moved on. So even if someone got suspicious about things and tracked it down, it really never led to his firm or from him to me. So that's something, if you're going to do conflict searches in the future, hiring outside counsel or other professionals, I always suggest that you should be careful how much you reveal until you hire them, and maybe mix in some disinformation in the information until, again, you hire them. Because again, and I think you should also ask them, what are their precautions on information protection on their firm? Like, are they doing anonymous passwords as that law firm did in the past? These are things that you might say, oh, it's too much trouble, or it's too much work to throw in this disinformation or be limiting on how much you tell other firms. But again, 999 times out of 1,000, you're 100% right. But 1 out of 1,000 or whatever number out of 1,000 or 10,000, you might come across someone like my co-accused, and they're going to take advantage of what you give them. And that might then blow back on you maybe a year or 2 or 3 down the road. If they get caught, it's going to lead back to you somehow and affect your careers. The level beyond that is conversations with innocent professionals and focusing on ego. So I know with lawyers, every lawyer thinks, because they're really smart, so they focus on how they're very egotistical. Being honest with you, I was a former lawyer, because they have to deal with clients who they think they're smarter than the clients, but the clients are always giving the orders, so they have to focus on how they're better than someone else, and usually it's better than another lawyer. So we realized that about lawyers in Toronto, especially, and in New York. So what Gil would do when he'd run into someone on the street, someone he knew from law school or another firm or another deal, he would initiate, say, what are you working on? And then he would say, I'm working on this. They say a small takeover transaction, always. Or he'd sometimes make up a takeover transaction that he's working on, and not give enough details, but just this takeover transaction for, let's say, $200 million or whatever. And the other person would say, well, I'm working on an even bigger deal. And he would actually reveal the details of a takeover. And again, if it was enough information to trade on, my co-accused would walk away and tell me about it, and we would trade on it. And again, there's no connection to the source of this information, this anonymous lawyer or investment banker who just happened to run into him on the street and told more information than he should have, obviously, and told it to a person who took advantage of that, where he wasn't obviously expecting that. The level beyond that is that careless public comments and document reveals by lawyers, investment bankers, CEO. So we had a rule that if I had nothing to do at that time, I would just hang out at a coffee shop in downtown Toronto, which was, back then, there was not a lot of Starbucks. So this was a very large Starbucks. And that's, a very large Starbucks. And it was used by investment bankers and lawyers and M&A types. So I would just sit there all day, working, reading, and I would try to overhear conversations. I would say about somewhere close to 10% of all our deals, maybe 10, 11. So in that range, we acquired just by overhearing people or seeing documents. I knew what to look for. I knew how to read things from afar or upside down. Just but people are just too open about information in a public setting. One example, there was a CEO of a gold mining company, and he came in loudly boasting, we're going to be taken over by this very large gold company that if I told you the name, you would recognize it. And he said, it's happening this day at this price. And I listened to the details. I found out who he was, and I confirmed his picture, everything else. And everything he said happened exactly as he said it, in public, loud enough, in a Starbucks, for someone like me to over here and actually trade on. We actually made a few $100,000 on that deal. We didn't go heavy on a deal like that because we don't control the source information, and this guy could be just boasting. But we took a position, and we made money. And again, we never would have had that deal but for this person openly speaking in public, where he obviously should not have been. Next slide, please. Now, this is a slide that when I started doing this, one of my first talks was with regulators, and I would reveal, how did we avoid getting detected for so long? Because I thought, well, I'm going to give these regulators some piece of quote unquote inside information that's valuable to them, maybe because they didn't catch me for 15 years. And I'll explain later, they really only caught me at the end because of mistakes, arguably I intentionally made to get identified. So I gave this list out, and I was very open about it to the regulators, until one of them was actually an American regulator came up to me and said, she thanked me for the speech and everything else. She said, I think it'd be good for you to take that slide down about how you avoided getting caught for all these years. And, I'd come from prison. So to me, it sounded like a threat. Like, it'll be good for you if you get rid of that slide, if you know what's good for you. And she was taken aback by my reaction. And she said, no. I know you're very earnest. I know you want to take, help other people with your experience. But she said, I think if someone sees that And maybe you might motivate one person out of whatever numbers that hear you speak, and they try it, and maybe they're not as careful as you, they don't have the experience you did, and they get caught, and they might react in a way, they might have a negative experience as you did in prison, or they might react in a way as your co-accused did and take their life. And if you found out about that, you would probably stop doing these talks and be devastated by it. And I thought about it, and she was 100% right. So for that reason, I take this information down for you today, not because, again, I think you're going to do what I did. Your ethics are better than mine were back then. But again, it's for the future time, 3, 5, 10 years from now, you might have a situation where pressures push that line of morality that's in all of us. It might shade you to one side too much than the other. And you might say, okay, well, I'll give that a shot. I have these other pressures, financial pressures or family pressures, whatnot, and I'll try it. And I don't want anyone to do that, again, for the unforeseeable consequences. No matter how smart you are, if you're a math trader uses math all the time, risk reward analysis all the time, you can never factor in all the consequences. And to that end, the next slide, please. That is the first. The first thing I saw when I came to my range in my first maximum security prison. It's called the Millhaven Maximum Security Prison, and that is gate right in front of you, and the range is behind you. A range is a collection of cells. In this prison, it's 15 or so cells on one side, 15 on the other. There's steel metal doors. Each one has a window that you can look out. There's no window to the outside, but you look out through the glass window to the hallway. It's about the size. You can see about 2 pieces of toast. So I was brought to this cage right in front of me with another inmate, a younger guy, and the guards behind me. They backed up, and then a similar gate behind me closed, and then this gate opened up in front of me, and the guards behind me in the speaker above us from the guard tower back into closing glass behind us. They said, "All right, start walking." So we start slowly walking. The guys in the different cells are yelling at us. I think just some are trying to scare us or just yelling at us or whatnot for amusement. And the guards say, "All right, keep walking." And up ahead, we see 2 doors slide open on perfectly opposite sides of the hallway. They slide open automatically. And the guard tower says, "Gromosik," that's me, "turn left." And he says the other guy's name, who I don't remember today. He tells him to turn right. So I walk to the door. I step into the cell door that's open on the left. It slowly closes behind me. As soon as it closes, my new cellmate, this guy named Clark, he was in for manslaughter. He jumps up. He says, "Oh, you are so lucky you came in with me, because that guy who went across the hall, he is getting torn up by Smart tonight." Now, through questioning, I learned that Smart was the inmate in the other cell. Big dude. He'd been in for double murder. He had cut off the heads of 2 brothers and then chopped off their hands and feet to make identification difficult. And by torn up, he had a habit, and everyone apparently knew it. All the inmates knew this. I don't know if the guards knew it. He had a habit of sexually terrorizing his new inmates, his new cellmates, just for amusement, because he knew he was never getting out of prison. So what he would do is he'd terrorize them, abuse them horribly, and it would go on for as long as it went on. Or if it was discovered or something happened, he would just be moved up to security to the special handling unit in this prison, the SHU unit, which was different stresses, different environment, different people. And he just did it for the change of scenery. And then a year or two till he worked his way back down for good behavior, back to one of these ranges with a cellmate, and he'd do the exact same thing again. It was to continue it on and on. So that was a terrible, that was a difficult thing to go to sleep with that night, hearing the story that I just missed going the wrong way. And the next morning when I woke up, we had breakfast. Now at Millhaven at that time, it was almost very Pavlovian. So what they would do at breakfast time, the guards would shake all the doors electronically. So they would shake, and you were expected to jump out of bed at that point, put on your shoes, and stand at the ready when the door would open. And when it opened, you were expected to step out in the hallway and then go down the hall like army ants in a straight line, grab your food tray, and then march back directly, and then go back in your cell. So the guards shake the doors, and I get up. I'm first up, and I'm standing in front of the door before it opens, and then it slides open, and I look across the hall, and I see the face of the guy I came in with. Now I could draw that person's face today with incredible accuracy. He had every single negative human emotion on his face you could imagine: pain, sorrow, anguish, confusion, anything you can imagine. You could see it written on his face. Now, as horrible as I imagine his night had been, his day did not get any better. So later in the day, when we had shower time, in this particular prison, there were 2 showers and 2 phones. They were at least 4 guys at a time. The showers were just 2 cells that were changed at the shower. So the door would just stay open. There's a shower head in there. There's no privacy, nothing like that. So the guy I'd come in with, when he was available for shower time, he walked to the shower, took his Bic disposable razor, stepped on it to release the blade, and slashed his neck and hands, and fell onto the range, blood and water everywhere. He did this. There was no privacy, so no sheet or nothing like that. So either from blood loss or just passing out, or he wanted to get it be found. He fell onto the floor of the range. Blood is everywhere. People are screaming. Guards rush in. They take him away. I never see him again. Now I note that because I was no tougher than that person. I'm sure he was tougher than me. My will was not to survive, was not stronger than his. So whatever horrible thing happened to him would have happened to me, and whatever happened to him after that, maybe some variation or something different, or maybe worse, would have happened to me. And I note that because I only escaped that fate by chance. I'm talking to you here today by chance, because I was told to turn left instead of right. Had I been standing on the other side of him, I would have gone into that cell. So that's when I say about unforeseeable consequences. If you do something illegal or unethical or whatnot, yes, it might be 1,000,000 to 1 that you experience what I did, maybe 10,000 to 1, or it might be 2 to 1 in the sense that your left is my right, and the fate you get is the fate, some variation of the fate he experienced. And that's a story I'd like you to always think about in the future when you are ethically challenged at some point, to think, maybe I factored in a lot of things, but I can't factor in the unforeseeable. And I can tell you, if you ever find yourself in prison, there are a lot of unforeseeable things that you could not imagine. I prepared before prison, I did research, but something like that and other things that happened, you cannot foresee it. Next slide, please. Now, how was I finally collared or caught? Now, it was not by compliance department's checks. Every maybe year or two, a compliance department would contact me from my trading. I had about maybe 30 different accounts. By the time it's from start to finish, 30 to 40 different accounts around the world at one time. And maybe about a year or two, a compliance department would call me to ask me, like, why did I buy this stock that mysteriously ended up being taken over? And I must have had plausible explanations for them, because nothing ever came of these calls or these investigations. They just basically checked the box. Yep, sounds plausible. And they just moved on. And then we knew this was happening somewhat frequently. So we always wanted to be believable. So my co-Qs and I, because we were immersed in the M&A world, watching stocks and takeover deals, that we had a list of indicators of someone else trading on inside information on a deal. Say the most obvious one would be someone posts on a message board saying, this is the takeover deal, this is the price, which happened a lot, believe it or not. I know that might be a good pump and dump technique, but it happened a lot. And I deduced that if someone had information, the inside trading information, it was a one-off situation for the most part, and they would overinvest in the stock. So when the deal hadn't happened yet, or the stock dropped down, like it naturally might drift downwards, they would panic because they were so overinvested. So they would start posting all the details online for anyone to see, hoping, almost like a pump and dump, hoping to bring it back up above the water so they could sleep better at night. And then hopefully for them, the deal's announced and they make their money. So it wasn't by compliance departments. It was not by brokers. As I mentioned, I dealt with maybe 30 or 40 brokers by the time it was all over. And I would bet money that at least 3 knew for certain, 100% certain, that I was a source of inside information trading. And I say this because I caught brokers front running me on big orders. I caught brokers piggybacking me on orders. So they would put my order in, let's say a few $1 million order, and I'd see level 2 and everywhere else where their order would come in behind me. And I had one broker, he actually made it to the end. He actually gave me $50,000 in cash. So I don't wear a tie, like John's tie, you'll see his lovely tie today. So I never wear a tie. So we met for lunch and he said, oh, I've got you this package of new ties. And I said, oh, this is a strange thing. And so I took it home, and it was $50,000 of cash in this envelope. And I realized, I could switch brokerage accounts by going, this guy is, he obviously, I think it almost was a message to me, like, I know what you're doing, but keep doing it, in the sense that I knew he had a billionaire client. One of the Canada's billionaires was one of his clients. I knew what you're doing, and I'm going to reward you to keep doing what you're doing, and we'll both pretend we don't know. And he would just give me money that way. So brokers did not turn me in, and not for whistleblower rewards. Back then when I started, there actually were no whistleblower rewards in Canada at that time. Now they're relatively small, I would argue. I think it's like 15% of what the Ontario Securities Commission can collect can be paid out in a whistleblower reward, which to me is I would give 100% if you really want to stop this, because, you know, if I'm being turned over by, let's say, a broker, they're going to see the reward and they'll say, okay, it's X dollars, but I have to time value discount it, which makes it, you know, 50% less. And then there's uncertainty, another maybe 50% less. So it's too small amount, because if a broker like the one who's giving me money, if he has a billionaire client, maybe, or a hedge fund client, I am worth tens of millions of dollars to him if I'm a steady source of good, reliable inside trading information. So again, when I talk to regulators in Canada, especially, I say, give the person who turned someone in 100% if you really are serious about stopping it. So far they haven't changed that rule, so I don't know how serious they are about it. How I was finally collared or caught after 15 years, it really was indifference to precautions. We took precautions at the beginning, or certainly I did, because, you know, obviously you don't want to get caught, but you're in a sense, you get a positive out of what you're doing. You want to not get caught so you could keep doing it, to be candid. And near the end, I did not want to keep doing it. It was emotionally draining on me to lie to my family, lie to my friends. At one point, we had actually stopped. And I took a 2-year hiatus. I bought a house north of Toronto, a big house. He bought a house in Toronto. We were living our lives. And he came to me about 2 years later, said, hey, let's do it again. I'd lost all my money in the market. So I was in charge of the buying and the selling. I guess he tried to do the same thing I was doing. It was not as good at it, and lost all his money. So whatever money he made inside trading with me, which is a little bit more than I did. When we split things up before that point, I gave him a little bit more. He'd lost it all. And the biggest regret I have, if I watch, you know, other ethical speakers on TED Talks or things of that nature, they always say, you know, I wish I never started. And, you know, that's sort of obvious, but I never view it as sincere. It's almost like they wish they were never caught. From my perspective, what I wish was, when he came back to me, instead of saying, all right, let's do it again until you make your money back, and then we'll stop again, I had said, I should have said, and it's my biggest regret, I should have said, no, I don't want to do it again. You know, thanks for the lifestyle I have now. We sort of got away with it. I'm going to give you X millions of dollars to please go on your way. You can rebuild your nest egg to make your money back, but I don't want to do it again. And so that's my regret. I chose keeping the money I had instead of giving it to him to go away, because I never would have said go away and not giving him money. So my regret is I valued the money I had in not giving it to him. So that was my biggest regret. And the second time, because of that, I didn't enjoy the process as much. I didn't take the same precautions. When I'd say to him, you know, I'm changing brokerage accounts, I'm using intermediary lawyers or trust accounts, the stuff we did initially, I didn't do it at the end because I just wasn't worth the trouble. I think subconsciously I wanted to end and wanted to get caught. So the next level I was caused my getting identified was family name accounts. And this sort of goes to my earlier point. I wasn't enjoying the money I was making. You know, I said there's two different kinds of money, the good money and bad money. So I could make $1,000 legally, and it gave me more pleasure than making $100,000 illegally inside trading. So what I did was I spoke to family and friends, and I said, look, if you give me your password and your online brokerage account, I'll do the trading, and you know, whatever you make, you can keep, you can pay me money if you want, etc. So if a family member made, let's say, $10,000 or $20,000, they were ecstatic on a transaction. Whereas to me, it wouldn't have made a difference to me at all. But I live vicariously through their happiness. So that's why I did it. But the problem is, the more times you spread information widely like that into personal accounts, you obviously increase exponentially your chances of getting caught, which we were. The final way we were caught, I'll call it the feed it in slowly story. And it really shows my indifference to precautions at that point in time. So what happened was I was going to buy a takeover candidate, and we had, it traded relatively thinly, maybe like 30,000 shares a day. We were going to start with like $2 million into it. It traded about $20 a share. So maybe 100,000 shares. So I called the broker, one of my regular broker, the broker actually who gave me the money, the $50,000 earlier. So I called him and I said to put the order in, and he was away. So then I was going to speak to his assistant, his next level assistant, who was very competent, and she was away from her desk. And normally in the past, I would have said, okay, I'll just call back later. I'll do the deal later when I could talk to the broker. But I didn't take that precaution. So I said, well, who's available? And they gave me another level of assistant. And I spoke to her and I said, okay, buy me 100,000 shares of this stock at $20 or better, and do it over the next 2 or 3 weeks. I knew the deal. I've been told the deal is about a month away. So do it in the next 2 or 3 weeks, 100,000 shares, $20 or better. So if the stock, let's say someone offered 1 or 2 or 3,000 shares at, you know, $20 or $19.50, we would grab those and then back up. That's how I understood feed it in slowly. That's how I always did it with her superior broker. So I said to her, do you understand how to do this? She said, yes, I do. I said, great. So I hung up the phone, turned on my computer. I watched the level 2 trading going on. I'm watching this relatively thin stock. And all of a sudden, I see the stock shoot up $2 on a market order for 100,000 shares. So she just thrown it into market, whatever it was, scooped up all the shares. The stock shot up. I had my 100,000 shares right off the bat. And I knew right then, I said, I remember seeing that, I said, I'm dead. I knew right there that was the, no matter how incompetent you might think regulators were identifying people, that was the ultimate red flag for us. And it really was. So about 2 weeks later, my co-accused came to my home late at night. And he said he got an email from his partners in New York that were coming to Toronto to talk to him. And it was about certain deals. And some of those deals were deals, well, obviously all those deals were deals that we had purchased. So he showed me this and he said, all right, I've thought about things. This is the plan. So, okay, great. Let's hear your plan. He said, you're going to commit suicide and I will take care of your children and say that, you did this all on your own and you access information because you'd visit my house all the time or my office and you were very crafty and you got the information that way. And he never knew anything about this. I said, that's a pretty good plan, but let me think about it. So when he left, I immediately hired a lawyer at that point in Toronto, did not kill myself, obviously. And then he realized, I think 1 or 2 days later, obviously I didn't kill myself, didn't see the reports on that. And he also stopped calling me because he didn't want to have any connection at that point. So he came to my house again, really early in the morning. And I knew he had snapped mentally. I knew even his initial idea of the suicide wasn't obviously a good one. He had snapped. So he's banging on my door really hard early in the morning. And I said, Gil, put your hands on the window of the door so I can see you don't have anything in your hands. I had suspected he was going to try to do something to me. And in Canada, it's very hard to access a gun. So I thought he was going to have a knife. So I had a hunting knife with me right beside me. So I let him in and he was wearing black gloves, sort of the O.J. Simpson black leather glove thing, obviously to hide fingerprints. It was actually warm at that point in time. There's no reason to wear gloves. So I knew what he was there for. And I said, turn around behind you. You've got something behind your back. He wouldn't turn around. And so I assumed right there that he'd come to kill me. And I don't know how he was going to explain my death in a plausible way to help him get out of it. But again, I didn't blame him for that. I think it snapped mentally. So I had to shoot him out of the house at that point. And he said, well, I'm going to kill myself. And I said, don't kill yourself. We'll get through this. I had resigned myself to prison at that point where he clearly had not. But I said, we'll work it out. If he had a better excuse or better explanation, I would have gone with it. So, but he said, no, I'm going to kill myself. I said, don't do that. And so he left. And later that day, he took a bunch of pills to try to commit suicide. Unsuccessful. His wife called me and she was also he was my best friend and she was also my very good friend. I had introduced them together to get married. I'd known her separately from him and put them together. And she said she knew right away as soon as he tried to commit suicide, she knew I might know. And I told her, look, you've got to get a lawyer for him. It's something really bad. It's about I don't know if I said inside trading, but I said something at work. It's very bad. And so that's the last time I ever spoke to her. And his telling me he's going to commit suicide was the last time I ever spoke to him. So then at that point, I started cooperating with authorities. And right the next day, because I told my lawyer what happened, they sort of wanted to bring me in right away. I think they wanted me to testify to them on record in case something did happen to me, being candid. So at one point, the regulators in the SEC and the OSC in Ontario came to me and they said, here's a list there was like 10 or 11 names on it. They said, explain how these 11 professionals are involved with your inside trading scheme. And these were guys in New York, Seattle, all over North America, professionals, lawyers, investment bankers. I think there's one accountant on it. And I looked at this list and I said, I have no idea who any of these people are. I don't know how they're the source of information. And then I thought about it and I said, well, these are people who maybe are doing conflict checks with Gil at his office. Maybe they're people he runs into on the street, maybe, something like that. So I think these are people who we gleaned information from, as I discussed earlier. And I was told, but for my cooperating and giving this truthful and plausible explanation, how some people might be involved, have 10 or 11 connections to us on deals we did. But for my cooperating, these careers would have been ruined because I know a lot of them were already suspended by their firms because no one could think, well, how are they involved with this deal unless it's intentional? And I gave the plausible explanation how it was unintentional and they were unwittingly used as part of our scheme. So what you should take from that is you should always be careful about who you tell information to or how you take information from the firm out in public, because there might be someone like me who takes advantage or my co-accused takes advantage of it. And your career through, I would arguably no fault of your own, but for carelessness or talking too much or talking to the wrong people, your career could be over. You could be blacklisted. No one will take a chance on you again because of something like that. So that's again, for these people, it's an unforeseeable consequence of not taking complete precautions at all times and assuming that you have something of value. Your information belongs to your firm, it belongs to others. It's something of value. When you leave with it out of the firm in your head or in your hand, if it's a file, that's valuable, and you are entrusted and you have fiduciary duty to protect it. And for your own self-interest, you should protect these things, because your careers and anything that falls from that could be destroyed, again, through no fault of your own but carelessness. Next slide, please. So that is Kingston Penitentiary. That is the last prison maximum security prison I was in during my incarceration. At that time, it was Canada's oldest operating prison. It was over 100 years old, and it was in its last few months of operation. So it was the worst prison I had ever been in. It was almost third world conditions. It was dirty, dark. Lights were broken. They just never repaired the light bulbs. On the right side of the screen, my screen, there's windows to the outside. Many of them were broken. It was February. Snow was blowing in. It was freezing cold. We had a washer and dryer on this range to do your laundry. You're given 2 shirts, 2 pants, 2 socks, 2 underwear. So the washer machine was broken, so you had to wash your clothes in your sink of your cell with a bar of soap. And the dryer did work, but because it was so cold in February, the last inmate's job when he was out, his job was to pull the exhaust off the wall for the dryer and let it run so that it would blow warm air into the range. In short, it was the worst place I'd ever been, with the toughest guys I'd ever been. I would say about a quarter to a third of the guys in this range were in for murder or some variation, some horrible violent crime. Is a very, very tough range. So I was there about 2 weeks, and the guards came to me and they asked me, hey, do you want to be the cleaner? Now, the cleaner, as the name implies, your job is you clean the range, you mop the floors, you hand out the food trays, because at that prison, you would be locked up for 23 hours and 40 minutes a day, solitary in your cell there. And you would only be allowed the 20 minutes for shower time and a phone. So you either take a shower or use the phone, or if you can do both in 20 minutes, you could do both. So I said, I'll take that job, because the benefit for me was not the money. It was, I think it's like $5 a day. The benefit was that it allowed me access to the phone, because my cell would be unlocked for about 10 hours a day to do all the chores. But it allowed me to get access to the phone, so I could call my children who were preschool. One was preschool, one was grade 1 or 2, to call them before school. Or so, because otherwise I would never know when I have access to the phone. If my cell was cracked open, which is what we call cracked open for shower time, it might be late at night, too late, or too early in the morning, or they're not around. So I did this job, the cleaner. The negative of taking this job is I had to interact with all the guys in the range. So I would, mop in front of their cells and hand the food to them, etc. And the guys quickly knew I did not belong. In the hierarchy of prisons, inside traders are not terribly respected. We're at the bottom, especially on a range with so many murderers and other rough guys. So they start riding me. And I decided when I'd gone to prison, I would never let anyone intimidate me, because in prison, I had done research ahead of time. If you are marked that someone can intimidate to pay money or other things, that reputation will follow you, because guys inside are inside for many years. They know someone in another prison. They will pass on information about you to someone else in another prison to exploit you. So I always said I would take a beating rather than be a victim. So when these guys started riding me, I would push back again, maybe with a smile on my face, a little bit good natured, but they would know they were not getting a free shot at me to do that. So I walked past one person's cell number 5, and that's his guy in there was a young fella. Everyone knew him, so he'd probably been in this prison since he was 18. He was like 30 something, but everyone knew him, and his name was Frankie. So Frankie started riding me like everyone else did, but then he crossed the line. He insinuated I was there because I was a pedophile, which is a terrible reputation to have in prison, because my life would be threatened if people actually believed that. So I pushed back on him in a way. I wish I'd known what I said. I actually don't recall, but I clearly crossed the line, and I said something back to him, because as soon as Frankie heard what I said, he paused, and loud enough, he yelled it loud enough for all 30 guys on this range to hear. He said, when my cell gets cracked open, I'm going to come over to your cell and I'm going to effing kill you. And he obviously didn't say effing, but I'm going to kill you. So I go back to my cell, cell number 9 there. And my cell is the only one unlocked. I can't lock it even if I wanted to. So I go into it, I turn off the light, and I was not a religious person at all. And I start praying, because I know nothing good's going to happen. Either Miraculously, I win this fight somehow. But the problem is I would get more prison time and maybe harder to see my children longer in prison, or more likely I get maimed. In this particular prison, a common threat was pulling your eyes out with a comb. So I'm sure it happened in that prison. A lot of guys would say that threat. So it must've happened there. Or I'm going to be killed, as he promised he's going to kill. All I know is he is now obligated, because of his reputation and where we are, to at least try to kill me. So I come to this realization. So I start not being a religious person. I just start praying. I guess, when you're in a desperate situation, you try to do anything you can. And I guess being a lawyer, I start getting into negotiations with God. So at one point I say, either I said out loud or I said it, loud in my head. I said, okay, God, if I maybe it's very ineloquent. It's probably a bad negotiating position. I said, if you help me get out of this, I'm going to take some good for other people. I'm going to change my life, going to direct it towards the benefit of other people. I'm going to take some good for other people from the bad of my experience. And as soon as I said it, again, I don't know, loud out in my head or loud, I whispered the words out. As soon as I said it, I heard a loud explosion of metal, boom. And then another explosion of metal, boom. And then feet were stomping bam, 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 towards my cell. So I'm ready. I go, well, Frankie's got some guys now. They're coming for me. So I get ready. My hands are up. And all of a sudden, this arm reaches out and grabs my cage door and pulls it shut. And it clangs, it locks with a clang. And then I catch my breath, and then 2, 3, 4 correctional officers run past my gate down the hall. So once I catch my breath, I come up slowly to see what's going on. I push my face against the bars, and down the hall, I see 2 correctional officers carrying a stretcher. And they're in my view, and they go out of my view. And a few moments later, they come in my view, and on the stretcher, there's an inmate having an epileptic seizure flailing around. It's Frankie, the guy who was going to come and kill me when his cell was opened up in the next few minutes, come to my cell. He's having an epileptic seizure. He's taken away. I never see him again. True story. I called people immediately after. I said, you won't believe what happened. Now, depending on your worldview, or even mine at that time, it was either an incredible coincidence, the timing, the situation, incredible coincidence, or divine intervention of sorts, because I'd made a promise to God in a prayer. But whatever your view of things, all I know is for certain that it happened immediately after I made a promise. And for helping me keep that promise that I made in that horrible place, I want to thank you, John, and I want to thank all of you for listening to me today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joseph. I greatly appreciate your candor and opening up your story and personal experience to help teach us. I can only imagine that having this talk isn't easy.
No, it's actually, I always say yes to anyone to ask, but afterwards I'm always very drained because I have to relive certain things. And I have to really think intensely about my best friend and how he died. And I always put myself in his head as he's climbing over that bridge. And I believe, thinking negative thoughts about me, even though we were such good friends. So I'll be sort of wrecked for a few hours after this. And, and I sometimes I get very emotional on my own afterwards because but again, for me, it gives me a satisfaction experience because I'm trying to give something back positive to others from the negative. Because if I didn't do this, I would just have this horrible negative experience and done nothing with it, positive with it. And I have to live with the fact that my best friend died because of something that I contributed to. So when I say thank you, it's always sincere. It's really sincere. You're giving me a chance to take something that makes me feel better about the situation. So again, that is a sincere thank you, John.
Thanks again. The objective of the talk was really to spread awareness, and personally, I'd rather prevent a fraud than catch one. Before I go into the Q&A, I wanted to remind the audience that if you hear or see something that doesn't seem right, please raise it. This includes not following the bank's policies, the bank's procedures. We cannot afford to have another scandal associated with our firm. If you're uncomfortable going to your manager, there are various other groups and venues to report any type of issue or concern that you may have. We have the silent whistleblower, we have compliance, and you have me as well. Just don't look the other way. Additionally, if you were someone that is contemplating an illegal act, just don't do it. There are legitimate ways to deal with any type of situation. With that, I will go and open up Slido and see what type of questions we have. So let's see. The first one I'll give you is, how common do you think insider trading is today?
I'd say it's more common than regulators identify and that the public believes. So I mentioned earlier in the speech that at one point, to anticipate what compliance people calling me would ask, we started tracking what we say were indicators of inside trading by other people. So again, the most obvious example, someone posting the deals publicly, or maybe option trading happening out of the blue on a stock, things of that nature. So it was, again, we had a list of like 9 or 10 things. And of all the deals we did, I look back, only one would I say that I never saw any of these indicators on that deal. Every other, 100, whatever other deals, I saw something, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other things. So it happens a lot. And I think it's a crime that many people can see themselves doing because they don't see a victim in a sense that, for example, I would go to weddings, and if people knew I was trading stock, I had one wedding, a person came up and said, you should buy this stock next week. It's being taken over. It was a Canadian animation company. It was called Sinar. He said, it's being taken over next week at, say, $45 on Tuesday, blah, 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 by this person. And I go, okay. So I told my QOQs about this. And he goes, oh, this guy's just pumping and dumping. It's, he doesn't know who you are. He's just pumping, telling everyone. And the very next week, the exact same thing he told me at the wedding happened. So no one would brag about, you'd say, committing break and enter. So, hey, you should do a break and enter next week with me, grab some stuff from this house. But they have no problem saying, passing on inside information really that someone else can exploit to make money on, and really perhaps hurt the firm that the information is being taken from. So that's a crime that I think a lot of people can see themselves doing, because it's not like a blue collar theft, right? I rob your wallet, or I steal something from your home. It's stealing information and then using it in an indirect way. So very common, I would argue.
Next question I got is, how did you tell your family, and how is your relationship with your family and friends today?
Well, the family was a difficult call. So as soon as it happened, I called everyone connected with me, and I suspected my phones were being tapped. So I would call the people and I'd say, I know you didn't know anything about it. I almost preface everything I say to absolve them. And so the deal I eventually struck, because in Canada, no one had received a criminal conviction for this before. So I took, 3 years, 3 months, but in return, I said, the innocent people that I impacted, people whose accounts I traded on, I didn't want them impacted too much. So they had to pay back the money I made from them, but only 15%, and it was allowed to be tax deductible. So maybe they lost 8% of that impact. More impactful for me was at a certain point in time, my son was about to turn 13, and he said, Dad, I don't want to see you anymore. And my birthday was coming up the next week. And I said, I didn't take him seriously. Why? I didn't think about it. And I never saw him again for 6 years. Now, I don't know if he was pressured by my ex's family or bullied at school or whatnot, with notoriety of the case, but I never saw him. Not a call, not a phone call, not a text, nothing, not a letter, nothing. But until this Christmas, and what happened was I still had access to my daughter, and she said, my son Josh wants to see me. And my son, when he was 12, he'd been told by my ex-wife's mother that I had murdered my co-accused, and she had convinced him that I would murder him, and that's why he wouldn't see me. But he still, part of him wanted to see me. He's thinking I'm going to murder him. Part of him still wanted to meet me. And I had heard through my daughter that he was much larger, very muscular, bigger than me. So I go to this meeting with him, expecting to get beat up by him. I'm thinking he's going to beat me up, get his frustrations out on me. And he's coming to the meeting thinking I might murder him. And as soon as we saw each other, we both started crying, because the first time in 6 years. And then we hugged it out. And for the next 2 hours, we just started staring at each other, because last time we remembered, I remember him as a little boy, and vice versa. And we just stare at each other. And then 2 months later, my son lives with me. So now both my children live with me. So I go from having no access to my son whatsoever, zero, to him living with me. So when I speak to religious groups, the angle that they want to hear about is, never losing hope, having faith, trusting in a higher power to get you through things. And I never lost faith. I expected one day to see my son again. I knew through my daughter that he wanted to be a police officer, which I'm sure was a rejection of me somehow. So I had fantasized about him driving down the road one day, him pulling me over and giving me a speeding ticket, and then that's how we would interact. But it worked out, obviously a little earlier than that, and worked out beautifully. So it was, the impact of the family was devastating for everyone and personally. But I didn't lose hope, and I have my son, both my children back in my life. So I feel very blessed. So that's another lesson people should take: never lose hope in situations like that.
I'll give you another question. How did you rationalize your decision, and what pushed you to keep you doing the insider trading for all these years? And with that, were you ever afraid of getting caught, or did you ever want to get caught?
Yeah, so we rationalized the beginning is, again, it was really a slippery slope, which when you tell people, it was almost like a lark. Oh, this guy did it at the firm. The white shoe guy did it, made money. Let's try it too, see what happens. And we did it, but it grew so quickly. So I had a seed capital from working as a summer jobs. I had, I think, $20,000, and we used that as our investment capital. And that's why the first deal we made $181. But in a short period of time, we're making $100,000, and then the capital is now, $3 million very quickly. And at that point, we're so into it, we realize this is so big. If we get caught, our lives are going to be ruined. So now we start taking precautions that we never did in the beginning. And I think, as I mentioned, I become addicted to the mystery of it. So oftentimes we never had complete information that we gleaned from someone else. So it was my job, if, for example, let's say all we knew was the company has property in some part of the world. So it was my job to research that and put two and two together. Whatever information we had, I would turn that into actionable information enough that I could buy a particular company. So I was addicted to the mystery, because when the deal was, let's say, announced on a Monday, it was almost like a slot machine. So I see the press release, oh, it's come out. So what I expected was happening. And then what's the price? How much money are we making? Like the slot machine. So it would come out, I get excited about it, and then nothing. The next, when's the next deal? When's the next deal? So it was a rush of the deals for me, which kept me going as long as we did.
Okay, I just want to say thank you again for sharing your experience, and I want to thank Hatem, Roberto, Guido, Pierre for hosting the event, and of course the audience for taking the time and attending the event, and Christine in Corporate Communications for help and guidance. Again, when you hang up the call, there is a short 3-question survey. When a call ends, please take the 2 minutes and complete it. And hopefully the feedback will be good, and we could have more of these type of sessions in the future. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you.